Thursday Night Tailgate, where the spotlight is always on the positive. Tune in Thursday night from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time to hear your favorite NFL legends, players, and coaches sharing their stories. Now back to Chris and Bob.
I wouldn't joke about anything else that happens here tonight.
All right, now joining us on the Kaiven Foods guest line is Vern Tejas. Vern is from Portland, Oregon. He's an American mountain climber and a mountain guide. He is the current world record holder for the amount of time taken to reach the 7 summits of the 7 highest mountains on each of the 7 continents, including Mount Everest, where he planted a prism pole, Bob, at the summit. He was the first person to solo climb Mount McKinley, now known as Mount Denali, during the winter season. He climbed the 7 summits in 134 days. Set the record, oh, by the way, at the age of 57, folks. So it's an amazing thing that Vern has accomplished, and he's climbed those 7 mountains 10 times at least each. So what an amazing athlete, and he's in the Alaska Sports Hall of Fame. He's written a book about his experience. It's titled 7 Summits, Life in the Mountains, which is available on Amazon.com. And we're honored that he is with us tonight here on Thursday Night Tailgate. Hey, Vern, Chris, and Bob, thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, Vern.
Hey, guys. Hey, thanks for having me on.
Vern, how did it all start? I'm always curious. You know, to climb mountains and to have that as an aspiration. When did that, bug first hit you?
Chris, I was in the Boy Scouts and got to go to Philmont Boy Scout Ranch in New Mexico. And on the ranch is actually one of the highest mountains in New Mexico, the 3rd highest, about 13,000 feet. I was 12 years old at the time, like most of my troop, and we actually got to climb it. And as we were climbing, I noticed that the troop masters and then some of the bigger guys were falling off the back of the pack. And as we got higher and higher on the mountain, I became more and more prominent. I was leading the charge up the mountain. I didn't realize that my training as a swimmer would come into such great effect at altitude. But by the time we got to the top, I was by myself, and I realized I was a natural. So it sort of set the hook at that point.
And Vern, like I said, you've also been a mountain guide and a guy who's had to go up and rescue people off the mountains. What are some of the precarious positions that people have gotten themselves into that you had to rescue them from?
I think the one that jumps to mind was the Korean climbers on Denali. They went up a ridge called the Cassine Ridge, a very strong, serious group, but a very dangerous ridge. They got almost to the top of the mountain when the leader was struck down with cerebral edema, which is an altitude sickness. They were no longer able to go forward. They had to stop, and a couple of them descended. And when they got to base camp, they alerted me to the fact that 2 of their members were up high on the mountain. At the same time, the National Park Service sent in a helicopter, and 4 of us went up to rescue them. Unfortunately, the other guys weren't quite as acclimatized, and I was able to get to the camp where the Koreans were and get them to the top of the mountain or to the top of the ridge, at which point one of the other rescuers caught up with me, and we brought down the incapacitated Korean leader all the way down to 17,000 feet, where he was able to fly off in a helicopter, evacuated to the medical facilities. It took about 24 hours for it to all take place, and I still think it's probably one of the more dramatic things I've been ever involved with.
And Vern, I read that at times you've taken an aluminum ladder attached to your backpack just in case you fall into a crevice. What's the most dangerous position you found yourself in? Whether it's, climbing a mountain or, whether I should say going up, coming down, what's the most precarious position you've had to, kind of thought, boy, one false move here and I could be in real trouble?
Well, the reason I took that ladder, Chris, is I wore it around my waist so that when I was soloing Denali in the winter, which I was the first person to do that in return, when I was up there, I would not fall in a crevasse. The first man to do it was Japanese, and they never saw him again. After he summited, he never got down. So I'm thinking he must have fallen in a crevasse. And so I took this ladder, wore it around my waist so that if I dropped into a crevasse, hopefully the ladder would bridge across the crevasse, and I would be able to save myself and crawl out on the ladder. as it laid on the surface. Fortunately, there's only one time that I ended up opening a crevasse up, and I also had skis on, so the skis actually kept me from falling in. But psychologically, I could not have climbed the mountain in the wintertime by myself without knowing that I had at least a second line of defense that would keep me from dropping to my death.
Bob, questions for Vern?
It's great to speak with you, Vern. This is a fascinating subject. I used to run competitively, so at least I have an idea why some people do crazy things and how it's hard to explain to other people why you do it. But I know you know that feeling. But mountain climbing, to me, is just another, you take it to another level. And I'm just wondering, Vern, what do you consider when that first major accomplishment that you attained? Take me back to that and your immediate reaction afterward. Were you under the impression that I can't wait to do this again, or I'll never do this again?
Well, it set the hook at a very young age, but my goal when I came to Alaska as a young man, I saw the mountain in all of its glory, and it so mesmerized me. I knew right then and there that I had to climb it, or at least give it my best shot. It took me 5 years, Bob, before I learned enough of the skill set that is required when you're climbing something big like Denali. But after the 5 years, I was able to go up there and pit myself against it. First day, I wanted to go home. I got so sick with the altitude and sunburnt, and just disappointed. I felt miserable, and I almost backed out at that point. But I said to myself, I need to give it one more shot. So I stayed on. I started feeling better, and ultimately got to the top of the mountain, and also climbed the north summit as well, which is very rarely climbed, and felt like I'd really accomplished my goal and my dream for 5 years, which was to get on top of this most beautiful mountain that I'd ever seen. So I was very fortunate. Certainly someone was looking after me from above, but the feeling of being able to fulfill a dream is probably what keeps me going back for more.
And Vern, the sport of mountain climbing, say to a young aficionado that wants to get into it, is this something that can be taught to a youngster, or is it something that you kind of got to morph into as far as relations to you? Or talk to us about, is this something that people can gain an interest in by doing, or is it teachable?
I think it's both. Having the interest in getting involved with a school club or one of the different mountaineering groups in the community is a great way to learn. It's not too expensive. You can tap into the knowledge of the older people, the mentors of the community. And that's a really good place to start. That's what I did when I headed up to Alaska as a young boy. I was able to get involved with the Mountaineering Club of Alaska and learn from the people who had been doing it for years. I kind of apprenticed myself. And after a couple of years of doing that, and then I became one of the trip leaders and started taking other people out. From there, ultimately, I got involved with the Denali and got invited back to be a guide, and have been doing it ever since. I think I've only missed 2 years out of the last. Well, that was when I was 26 years old, and now I'm in my 60s. So I've been climbing that mountain a lot now, 57 times. But another way you can get involved with it, if you have the desire, is to read the books. And I also have just recently come out with an ebook, a free ebook for people who want to learn how to climb at high altitudes. This is the summation of 40 years of my being in the industry, in the business of guiding at high altitude. And that can be obtained by going to sevenSummitSpecialist.com. It's a free download. It's got 40 years of my experience and all the skills that really are necessary for climbing high, big mountains. So that's another tool for people who are interested in getting involved with it.
Vern, I have to imagine that you've seen some of the most beautiful views that any human has ever seen. What sticks out to you from the things that you've gotten to, climb up and see that, most of us will never have the opportunity to see?
It's, for me, climbing above the clouds and having a sea of clouds below, from looking down on that when there's a sunset taking place, is probably the most dramatic, spectacular view available in the world. The mountain peaks sticking up through the sea of clouds. For me, that's it just brings my heart so much joy to be up there and experience nature at its finest.
And Vern, I also have to imagine, as you're climbing up and getting higher and higher, you're seeing things again that most people don't see, right, in a lifetime. But have you ever run across something, you're looking out and you're seeing something and you go, "What the heck is that?"
That's a great question. The biggest, I think the most dramatic things in the mountains are the ice falls. So the glaciers tumble down, and when they do, they first crack into crevasses, but as they get steeper and steeper, then you have these giant masses of ice sticking up out of the glacier, sometimes the size of buildings. And when those topple, I tell you what, it gets your attention. It's like a building falling over. And I've seen that, I've experienced that several times. That turns into an ice avalanche and sometimes roars down the mountain, going for thousands of feet, maybe even miles. And to me, that's the most startling aspect of being in the mountains, is a huge serac fall and avalanche.
So, like we say, you've climbed the 7 highest summits on the 7 continents. So it begs the question: which is the toughest? You would think, I think all of us would default to Everest, but is it? Is that the toughest?
I think you're absolutely correct. Due to the lack of oxygen, I mean, you're 5 miles up in the atmosphere. It's so thin up there. Just the oxygen deprivation alone is enough to flatten most people. It's challenging just because of that. There's more difficult routes, of course, but not quite into outer space like Everest is. So for me, out of my 10 summits, 3 times it's tried to kill me. And so I've got a lot of respect for being at high altitude, and definitely that's the toughest of just because of the altitude. Certainly there's others that are more remote and have worse weather, but the altitude's the number one thing that'll get you.
So, like I said, you actually set the record when you were 57 years old, but that's because you came back and had to reset the record. You had it, someone else got it, then you came back to get it. So it was when you heard that somebody else did it a little bit quicker, were you like, no, I'm going to come back. I don't care what it is. I'm going to come back and get this record back?
Well, Chris, records are made to be broken, and I think there's a little bit of the competitor in all of us. So it's bound to be broken more times in the future, and hopefully one day I'll have the financing to go after and get it back. You know what I mean? So it's just one of those things that I think human nature always wants to do one better, and I'm no different than anybody else in that area.
Bob, one more for Vern?
Sure, I got a ton more, Chris, but let me give him one more. I mean, Vern, I'm thinking when you have lack of oxygen and altitude sickness, there's a lot of other things that can go wrong. Tell us maybe some of the more common injuries that you've had over the years, and perhaps one of the worst things that's happened to you physically.
Well, there are several, as you mentioned, Bob. I think frostbite, where I almost lost a toe, probably is pretty debilitating. If you're not going to be able to walk very well for the rest of your life. I was very fortunate. Went to one of the better doctors in Alaska, and I still have all 10 toes, so I'm happy about that. Pneumonia is something that I've run into several times on Everest, and that'll put you down forever. Altitude sickness, pulmonary edema, cerebral edema, I've experienced those, but been very fortunate. I've come away unscathed in the long term. So I'm very happy about that. One of the things I'd like to mention, Bob, is recently I've been involved with an organization known as TAPS. That's a Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors. It's a military survivors who've, during the mourning process, the grieving of their loved ones, have come together and in a support group, a network that tries to enable people to get back up on their feet. And just in the last 3 years, I've been able to do several climbs and treks with this excellent organization, and it brings out the teacher in me. I'm able to instruct people who are not mountaineers in how to deal with altitude, how to deal with the challenges of being cold and the challenges of the weather. And for me, TAPS is a great organization that I think most military families should be aware of. It's a great resource for survivors.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I was hoping you would talk about tonight, Vern, and especially for our listeners on the Armed Forces Radio Network, because they can go online to taps.org to get more information about what that wonderful organization is doing. So kudos to you for being involved and helping those folks out. That's great work, Vern.
Thank you very much. We just got back from Peru from doing a trek to Machu Picchu with TAPS. So it's an ongoing love to be up there with those people and help them get some self-confidence and back on their feet and know what they can do for themselves. It's a great revelation for me. I'm looking forward to doing some more.
So what's next for you, Vern? What's up next?
Next week, I head over to the Himalayas. I've got a trek to Everest Base Camp and a climb of a mountain named Island Peak. It's actually higher than Denali.
So let our listeners know, Vern, how can they stay up to date with all the things that you're doing, whether it's online or over social media?
I'm on Facebook as Vern.Tejas, Vern.Tejas on Facebook, and VernTejas.com is my website. And I look forward to meeting you guys on social media. It's wonderful. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Tumblr and Instagram. So anybody who wants to get in touch, please do. I'll answer all your questions. And hopefully you can get some information out of that free ebook at 7summitspecialist.com.
There you go. Vern, thank you so much for being a part of the show. It was very interesting talking to you. We hope you'll come back and do it again sometime. Love to, like Bob says, a million questions for you. We'd love to have you back sometime.
Great. I look forward to it, gentlemen. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
take
Vern.
care, Vern.
All right.
Bob, you want to talk about a guy that, as you and I were talking prior to the show, a tough guy. He's climbed all 7 of those summits at least 10 times. Some, as you talked about Denali, he's done 57 times. An amazing athlete, an amazing story, and an amazing guy too. Kudos for him for the TAPS work that he's doing for those folks as well. So great stuff, Bob.
I'm almost speechless, Chris. When you're doing things that he's done, it's in a different, I hate to use the words, it's in a different stratosphere where his mind is at and what he can handle and what he's done in his life. But there is so much more we can get into. But any guy like this that it just needs to constantly challenge himself. Chris, when you're at the top of Mount Everest, I mean, where do you go from there? What do you ask yourself
right.
when you're at the top, Chris? So,
right.
But I just love to pick his mind, and that's where these guys, it's just a fascinating interest, and we got to talk to him soon again.
Yes, absolutely.
We've
got our next guest, Chad Brown, hanging on the line. We'll get to Chad after this quick station ID.